Hi, and thanks for joining us for today's edition of Medcan Presents. Today's webinar is called Coping Through COVID-19. I'm Christopher Shulgan. I'm one of the people who create content for Medcan, and I'm here today with Dr. Gina Di Giulio, Medcan's Director of Mental Health and a clinical psychologist. How are you, Gina?
Good. Yeah, just hanging in one day at a time, coping.
Boy, I feel I looked out the window about 15 minutes ago and it was snowing and hailing and like the weather, it just looked like it looked like we were about to have a tornado. And right now I look out the window and it's a blue sky and it looks like, totally spring. And I feel like that. I feel like this time is just so up and down. And one day I'm like, oh, my family's getting so great together. And then the next I feel like, oh my God, the pandemic, and it's never going to end. So what are you hearing from your clients? You must get a great sense of, kind of the pulse of what's going on right now.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll start by saying that how you're feeling is completely normal, right? So people have relayed to me this feeling like they're on a roller coaster where just that one day they feel like, okay, they've got this, they're coping well, and then for whatever reason, maybe it's something that they hear in the news, they get triggered, and all of a sudden they shift to worrying or worrying about the future. So this current crisis can really feel like we are on this roller coaster of emotion. So I'll just start by saying that sentiment is shared by others, what you just shared, and that is completely normal, right? We're dealing with something that we really haven't dealt with before, certainly not on this scale. There's no template as to how to cope or what to do. There's uncertainty around the future. So it's completely normal to feel anxious, sad, overwhelmed, grateful, guilty, happy, and all of the above. So if that's what you're experiencing, I just, for our listeners, I want to normalize all that. Completely normal. Your question in terms of what else I'm seeing, we've been now at this for, I don't know, maybe about 6 weeks or so since this, pandemic really broke. What I'm starting to see now is most people have kind of gotten into a bit of their groove, right? They've kind of sort of figured out what they have to do in order to best cope right on the daily. So I'm seeing more of, people really just taking care of the basics. So what does that mean? Ensuring that you're getting good sleep, exercising when you can, eating well. So people have, for the most part, figured that out. But what I've seen in the past couple of weeks, especially, which has been wonderful to see, is this shift towards sort of not just, thinking of ourselves individually and how we can cope, but now thinking more about others. So there's been more of a community focus, which has been wonderful to see. So, turning outwards, things like there's been more of like checking in with other people, more of a focus on helping others, which is wonderful because it's really one of the best things that we can also do in order to help cope with this, right? Because once we do that, focusing on others, focusing on this sense of community, it really does help to get us out of sort of a negative, headspace, if that's where we're at. It helps to feel a bit more in control in terms of what's happening because you're actually doing something or finding a way to do it, doing something about it. And when you help other people, it just simply feels good, right? And so it does help to reduce stress, reduce anxiety. Helping others, has sort of consequences that are really far-reaching, even beyond, being the recipient of the help. So it's really a win-win situation, and I'm seeing so much more of that now, which again has been wonderful to see.
Sure. Yeah, I think the community aspect of things really helps, and I think you're onto something there, and that's Yeah, I feel like the more that you can sense that, so we're all in this together, I think that's really important. We deployed a poll, and so some of our attendees responded to the poll. So the poll question was, how are you feeling today? 3 out of the 11 respondents replied pretty terrible, and today is a tough one. We had 2 out of 11 say not bad, but I'll make it through. 2 out of 11 were mediocre, not good. And then I'm feeling pretty good today was 4 out of 11. Gosh, I feel like I go through that range. You know, but yeah, I mean, what what is it that you say to people when they are just having one of those terrible days? What do you say when you don't see a way to getting through to the end of the day?
Yeah. So, first of all, acknowledge how you're feeling, right? Again, these feelings are normal. There's no right way, and similarly, there's no wrong way to feel, right? During all of this and what's happening. So, by acknowledging, what I mean by acknowledge is label how you're feeling, right? Attach a name to it, a descriptor to the moods that you're feeling, and know that that's normal. And don't judge it. That's really important. Don't judge how you're feeling, because the more you tell yourself I shouldn't be feeling this way or it's wrong, that's just going to keep you stuck in that negative mood space. So just acknowledge how you're feeling, and then you can ask yourself the question, is there anything that I can do about how I'm feeling right now? Is there any action that I can take? Is there anything that I can focus on that's actually within the realm of my control that might help me to feel better, right? But you do want to start off from that place of acknowledging how you're feeling, not judging, and then actioning. Sometimes people, I think, jump too quickly to the action part. And when you do that without actually just taking stock of how you're feeling, again, from that non-judgmental place, sometimes that can be unhelpful, because when you jump too quickly to action, it can serve as a bit of a distraction from how you're feeling, right? And so if you don't acknowledge how you're feeling, and you try and just do something just to cover up how you're feeling it, not to feel, in other words, that might work temporarily, but ultimately those negative thoughts, those negative feelings are going to be presented back to you. You have to just kind of acknowledge them, and sort of deal with them in a healthy manner, and then move to the action phase. Because taking some action on how you're feeling, especially if you're contending with more negative emotions like, depression, anxiety, does help. My clients who know me, I say this invariably to all of them at some point in our working together, is I'll always say, action is the antidote of anxiety. Action is the antidote of depression, because if you can actually do something about how you're feeling, it really does help. It will reduce those negative mood states. So find some helpful action that you can take. Again, something that's within the realm of your control, and then action that thing. Do something about it.
So own the feeling. Take ownership of the feeling and sort of admit it to yourself. I feel like particularly I think high achievers will be reluctant to admit that they're feeling down or feeling like having a kind of a bad day. And so I think that advice is really helpful, to acknowledge to yourself that, yeah, this is what I'm feeling. Okay, so that, and then action is the antidote to anxiety and depression. I think that's really, so maybe do something. Well, let's turn to the second poll. So the question was, if you do have anxiety, what is the source? So we had 25% said the pandemic, getting sick. 25% said the pandemic, the economic repercussions. 33% said that they were feeling anxiety about making it through social distancing. 15% said that they were anxious about getting along with the people around me. And then 31%, so you can answer yes to numerous of these. 31% said loneliness, 38% said something else. So I think every one of those is authentic. I mean, everybody is responding to this sort of and feeling this sort of way. The single biggest one, aside from, well, let's talk about the two. So one, and you've talked about this to me before, so let's talk about this one because I think you have a great take on this. The pandemic, making it through social distancing. If you're feeling anxiety about that, can you talk about that and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. First of all, that's an unfortunate term, right? I actually hate that word, social
Social,
distancing. I
yeah,
hate it.
sorry,
Really,
yeah,
we should be using, the term physical distancing because
great point.
really that's what, right, the recommendation is about. Physical distancing, but that does not mean social isolation, right? Those two things are very different. Given the current recommendations, yes, that have been imposed on us in terms of physical distancing, it sort of presents, sure, a challenge in terms of keeping connected with others, but it is so important to do that at this time. We have to find different ways of doing so, right, and sort of creative, out of the box solutions to that. But this is a time where we really have to ensure that we continue to invest in personal relationships and put the work in order to continue to foster those relationships and keep them going. So things like checking, well, what we're doing right now, right, checking in with people over a virtual platform is wonderful. Email, text, that's great too. So whatever works for you. I prefer sort of this mode because you can actually see people. It's a little bit more intimate than say chatting over text, but whatever works for you. But just ensure that you are keeping up with your relationships. Maybe, reaching out to people that you haven't heard from in a while. Checking in with others to make sure that they're okay. A few people mentioned that their, loneliness is worrying them or worrisome to them. Or that's the predominant emotion that they're feeling. For sure. I mean, check in with, especially, friends, family who might live alone and might be particularly prone to isolation, especially if they, have a vulnerability towards anxiety, depression. So checking in with one another, maintaining those social connections, right? Forget about the word social distancing. Think of it as physical distancing and do sort of whatever is required in order to continue to invest in relationships is so important, especially right now.
So I think that along those lines, I think one of the questions I'm just gonna because one of the questions that came through via email from one of the attendees. So it's a little pushing back on what you've already said, but like, what if you're feeling lonely? I know everyone says to Zoom, but sometimes that just doesn't feel like enough. And I do, sometimes you just get sick of, I mean, you must feel this, you just get sick of being on screens or, talking to somebody through Zoom. Do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're really feeling lonely, I mean, to the point where you're worried that it might lead into feeling depressed, there are some wonderful resources that have popped up in the past few weeks that are free of charge, online, available to people for this reason. So to help them stave off this feeling of loneliness by creating opportunities to connect with others. So what I mean by that, there's a lot of now online social support groups for people who are feeling lonely through this crisis, that they can find other people who might be feeling similarly to connect with them, which can also be really validating, right, in terms of how you're feeling. Just yesterday, sort of the government of Ontario posted all of these resources on their website. So if you just Google, free mental health supports Ontario, a list will populate that will point you towards these resources in this direction. If, Zoom, this is kind of not your thing, then maybe it's, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's through text, but find some way, right, of keeping connected with other people is really important. And if you just don't have access to those people, to those supports, then you know what, this is a great time, kind of what I was saying earlier, to think about how you can be of help to other people. volunteering within the confines, of course, of physical distancing and sort of those limits that we're under, checking in with maybe a neighbor, an elderly neighbor who might need some help, doing some volunteer work, just finding a way to connect with people outside of yourself, right? Thinking again of sort of having more of that community focus really can also do wonders in order to, in terms of helping to stave loneliness, right? Because when you help others, again, you invariably end up helping yourself as well. And it helps to sort of keep the bigger picture in mind, that kind of what you were saying earlier, that we're all in this together, right? And when you feel that we are, and that you can be in this with strangers, it really does help feel like you're not in this alone.
You can be in this with strangers. I love that. And what? So one thing that has really helped for me, and I'll just be quick about this, is getting. So I'll go for a walk or I'll go for a run, and just greeting other people within the parameters of physical distancing. So staying 2 meters away from everyone, and if I'm on a run, I'm providing people with big lanes. But just saying hello to other people is such a God. I find it helps so much. Just that kind of meeting of the eyes and say hi, how are you, or good morning if it's the morning, and just the acknowledgement that other people exist and that there's an innate goodness sort of to humanity. I feel like that really helps, at least me personally, to stave off some of that loneliness. And I think just getting outside and just seeing other people, because one of the things is that you're stuck inside with your family, or maybe not your family, maybe you're stuck inside by yourself. It's hard to not be around other people to the extent that we have been lately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. So, and this, something that this time allows for us to do is to, again, really just find ways of connecting with society on a different level. Because, when we're working, or for those of us who work, or, we have our busy lives, and, we have to think about, okay, I have to get to work, and, commuting and and maybe you get in your, half an hour run in the morning, but then you're thinking, okay, I got to run back home to get ready for work. Like, you don't really have time, right? Or that doesn't leave much time to really stop and reflect and think about what's important to you. Think about, hey, reaching out and saying hi to that jogger who just passed you, right? So this
Absolutely.
I think this is such a wonderful time for opportunity, and really, I would hope, that we all sort of reframe this time as such, right? So think of this as a time where, you can do things that you maybe don't have time to do, right? When we're normally, business as usual in the sort of hustle and bustle of daily life. It's a time really to, again, think about, what's important. Think about, what it is that maybe, you didn't have time to do before. Think about,
frame it as an opportunity.
What's a priority? Yeah, exactly. What's a priority for you? What is important? What are you missing in this period? Because that'll also tell you, what's important. So, for me, like many people, I am missing seeing people in person, right? Outside of my family who I love. But hey, I see them every day, right? I need a bit of a break from them. So I'm missing my friends. I'm missing, just like hugging them, right? And so
yes,
be sure I put them all on notice that when this is all over, it's going to be sort of bear hugs for everybody, many rounds of it. So that just reinforces to me how important certain people are in my life, and just how important the healthy relationships are that I have. And so I'm going to ensure that, I continue to put in the work to maintain those relationships, especially when this is all over. So think about what you're missing. That'll be a window into what's important to you. And think about maybe how you can work on still ensuring that those things are running smoothly now, right? And put in the work, to keep those things going. The things that matter to you, things that are priorities.
Well, let's move. So we do have some more questions that I want to get through. So here is a great one that came via email. What to do when a loved one is going through depression during these times and pushes the loved ones away? How to deal with that stress, the breakup? Is there a comeback? That sounds like a great question. How do you respond to it?
Yeah, great question, right? So what do you do? So, I mean, person who asked the question is doing the right thing if they are in fact, trying to help a loved one who is depressed, because you want to actually acknowledge, right, how they're feeling. You want to tell them that, hey, I can see that you're struggling or you're having a difficult time. Sometimes people will ignore, well-intentionedly, so ignore, or they don't want to, like, there's this idea that if they acknowledge how the person is feeling, that somehow is going to make it worse, right? Like, we don't want to talk about it because that's kind of, maybe it'll make them feel worse. No, people who are depressed, people who are anxious, they do, even though they might not always show it, but they do need others to acknowledge how they're feeling, to reach out, right? And you might have to, if you're the loved one trying to help that person, you might have to try that several times, right, before they accept your help. But I would say don't give up. Okay, continue to sort of to ask that person if there's anything that you can do to help. I know it's hard, right? Especially people who tend towards depression sometimes will shut people away. It's one of the symptoms of depression, right? So that behavioral withdrawal. But keep at it. You can offer them, access to maybe supports or resources. There are a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, free online resources for people now who are contending with depression and anxiety. So maybe as a loved one, you find those resources and you share them with your loved one and encourage them to get help. Acknowledge it. That's the most important thing. Acknowledge how the person is feeling. Don't shy away from it. Offer your help. If they shut you out, continue to try, I guess, within reason. I think the most important thing for that person to know is that when they're ready to accept help, that there is help available, right? And they will sort of go towards the loved one when they are ready to do so. But just knowing that support is in place is so important.
That's great. Okay, thanks for that. Moving on to the next question. So this is from a seminar attendee. I think this is relating to the poll question that what was the topic of anxiety? So the attendee is responding, anxiety from trying to take care of other people and feeling responsible for others. Gosh, I think a lot of people are feeling that way lately. Can you talk about that? And then how do you deal with that sort of anxiety? I think that's a great, that's a great topic.
It's a great question, for sure. Many of us are being sort of compelled right now to be in these positions we haven't had to be in before, right? So we're home and maybe, having to take care of young children, having to manage now their schooling. We're turning into teachers. We may have, elderly parents that we need to watch out for and care for. So we're being sort of thrust, I think, into these multiple caretaking roles that we haven't in the past, or certainly not had to deal with at the same time, right? So yeah, so great question. I think in that case, okay, so a couple of things. First of all, you cannot be all things to all people. So know that, right? And remind yourself of that. The best we can do is the best we can do, right? And so careful not to, I guess, hold yourself to too high of like perfectionistic standards, right? Of trying to be all things to all people, be the perfect, whatever, mom, a daughter, partner, teacher. Like, no, we're not going to be able to do everything perfectly. Your best is truly good enough in this situation. And so, acknowledge that. But secondly, in order to take care of people, in order to do your best and juggle these multiple roles, you do have to start by taking care of yourself, right? That old adage, you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself first, right? Put on that oxygen mask before you take care of others, is so true, always true, never more true than now. So you do have to carve out that time for yourself, right? Especially if you're juggling multiple roles, you're going to have to literally carve out that time, schedule a time, protect some time for yourself to do whatever is, rejuvenating, recharges your batteries, whatever that means to you. That's very subjective. Whatever self-care means to you, ensure that you're carving out time to do so. Again, because you cannot manage those multiple roles. You cannot take care of others if you don't take care of yourself first. So please ensure that you're doing that now more than ever.
Absolutely. You can't be all things to all people. I think that's okay. Um, this is nice. Dr. Di Giulio, you have so much positivity and energy. Do you have to work at it, or do you find that you're just a dialed happy person?
Okay, maybe a mix of both. No, I am not, for sure. I get this a lot. People say, I've had people say to me, "Oh, you're a psychologist, so you must never get anxious." But what? Okay, a psychologist is what I do, but I'm human first, just like everybody else. So do I get anxious? When you took your poll of what people are worrying about, I've worried about all of those things. Absolutely, for sure. I think, the advantage maybe that I have is I have more of a window in terms of what I need to do in order to stay well, because it's just what I do and that's what I've studied. So no, I absolutely have to work at it. This thing is a Fitbit, right? So this is what saved me, to be honest, in this pandemic. I've really put stock into exercising and making sure that I'm eating well. That's what works for me. I'm not saying that's what works for you, but to answer your question, I've also had to pivot and make some shifts in my life in order to, to cope and to stay well. So yeah, it absolutely takes work. I'd say, to answer the viewer's question, I tend to trend more towards positivity. I'm just more of an optimistic person in general, but absolutely I have to work at it as well. And does that go perfectly? No. Do I have my tough or bad days? Yeah, absolutely. And that's normal, right? It's normal. But yes, to answer your question, I absolutely have to work at it as well.
So I think we'll try to fit one more in. So this is again from an attendee. I am a regular Headspace user and find mindfulness techniques very helpful. I know that I am acting illogically with the excessive amount of worry and anxiety, which is spreading to many things in my life that were never a concern before. Do I just have to stay the course and try to break this negativity loop I keep getting caught in? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so there's a few things I can respond to. First of all, mindfulness, amazing. Keep doing that, because we know that mindfulness is one of the best ways to help combat stress, especially stress of the worrying type. Okay, so keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. But if you're finding that that's not enough, right, and you keep worrying, that the person said that they're finding that their worry is perhaps disproportionate to what's happening or what's actually happening. So if you're finding that worry is disproportionate to the actual risk at hand, that's when you would want to maybe ensure that you're not doing other things that might actually be exacerbating worry. So some things that come to mind are ensuring that you're not becoming a media junkie, right? Careful with watching too much news or sort of doing too much research into what's happening, because if you're already worrying about this pandemic, that's not going to help you, right? So ensure that you're setting some limits and some boundaries in terms of what you're exposing yourself to media-wise. Check that you're not overexposing yourself to social media, because that's just a breeding ground for anxiety. Focus on the facts at hand, right? So what this person, if I was working with this viewer, I'd say, well, what exactly are you worrying about? Are you worrying about getting sick? Okay, so if that's the case, let's look at the actual facts at hand. So what are the infection rates in Ontario? Right now, they're about just under 5.5%. Okay, of those 5%, what's the survival rate? It's at least 95%. All right, 2/3 of the people who get really ill are over the age of 65. So I would help that person focus on the facts. So think about what it is that you're actually worrying about, and focus on the facts and orient yourself, anchor yourself to those facts, because focusing on facts does wonders to help reduce anxiety.
So it's 1 o'clock, and I know you have plenty of schedule. Do you have time for one more quick question? So how do you manage resentment toward your partner during this time when you have two totally different schedules? For example, you are working nonstop, long hours, and he is not working right now. That's a tricky one.
That is a tricky one, especially if you're in a smaller sort of confined space. Okay, communication, right, is the foundation of any good, healthy relationship, and communicating with your partner, always important. Again, extremely important now. Okay, so communicate. What do you need, you being the person who's working? What do you need in order to ensure that you're able to do the work that you do? So maybe it's ensuring that your partner respects your schedule. Maybe it's having somewhere in the house that you can work from where your partner doesn't go to. So think about what it is that you need, negotiate that with your partner. But in order to negotiate, you have to communicate. And many times I think the mistakes that people make in relationships are they assume that their partner should know what they need. Make no assumptions. Pretend like your partner's a 5-year-old. Okay, so you have to really just get to the basics. Don't assume anything. Tell your partner what you need. Okay, communicate that to him or her. Really important during this time. Okay, so communication is going to get you far. And then, listen, also know that some of this is normal, right? We're being forced to be around people, 24/7. It's not easy. So then I'd go back to, the self-care recommendation from earlier. Ensure that you're taking some time for yourself. And, maybe for this viewer, it's try and get out of the house every day if you can, like spend some time alone, go for those, healthy physical distancing walks. Just ensure that you're getting a break from your physical environment. Changing up the scenery will be helpful as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Di Giulio, and thank you. Okay, wait, I'm trying to share my screen here, and I hopefully have. Thank you so much for all of these, and thank you for the time. And I think this has been great. In terms of upcoming webinars, on Tuesday, April 28th, we have Healthy Eating Strategies with Dr. David Macklin. On Thursday, April 30th, we have How to Keep Fit at Home with Stephen Saltzman, and that'll be a Q&A. We also have on this upcoming Thursday, we have a seminar about return to work, and that'll feature our leadership team of CEO Sean Francis, President Ashim Kamani, and then our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Peter Nord. So thanks for attending, and stay safe and stay healthy in these extraordinary times. Thanks very much. And we're just gonna end. Thanks a lot, Gina.
Okay, thanks.